Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast for Friday slate of MLB with Ship My Money. Adam, of course, I am Jason Floyd. Adam, man, how's it going, man?
Doing good. Excited to do it. It's our first show together, so excited to do it with someone I haven't worked with before.
Yeah, man. Did the Early Bird on Sunday, so it was it's been a long time since I've had to do MLB shows going back to my terrestrial radio days. So we're a week in to MLB. What's your takeaway from the first week of games?
I think the biggest thing has just been that even more so than usual, you have a lot of just unexpected stuff going on, namely with starting pitching. In a lot of cases, we've had some idea of what pitch counts or what pitchers are going to be on pitch counts and who's going to be limited. But you've also just had a lot of managers kind of be really, really cautious. The obvious one happened the other night with Andrew Heaney being pulled at 64 pitches because Joe Madden thought he might be tired. I mean, he said he wasn't, but it's been weird. And I think that it's just a reminder, obviously baseball more so than a lot of sports, there's an edge to being contrarian anyway. But when you have this much uncertainty around so many pitchers, it's kind of in cash games, I think it kind of cuts both ways. In cash games, there's even more reason to kind of be risk averse and go with the field there and don't take a crazy stand, and vice versa in tournaments where guys can project as well as you want. There's just so much uncertainty for most pitchers right now and how deep they're going to be able to go into games that I think that's something you can kind of leverage in tournaments and look to get an edge on the field.
Look, as a Rays fan, I'm so used to Joe Madden and his craziness. You never know what to expect out of that guy.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And Andrew Heaney the other day even said that he was shocked when Madden came out of the dugout to pull him. But we saw him kind of have a short leash with the Cubs too. So hopefully that ends sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, I just pull up the MLB stats. If I would have told you a weekend that the Boston Red Sox would have the second most earned runs, what would you have said?
Definitely wouldn't have believed you knowing that they played 3 of their games against the Orioles.
Yeah, that is something to bring up. Of course, we are sponsored by SuperDraft. Of course, the future of daily fantasy sports has arrived. Experience SuperDraft's exclusive game mode multiplier. Say goodbye to salary restrictions. Have a load of lineup freedom. Use your fantasy sports knowledge to draft any player you want and build your very own dream team. Countless lineup possibilities let you experience daily fantasy sports the way you want. SuperDraft offers contests for NBA, MLB, PGA, NASCAR, and MMA, so you can enjoy the best of DFS all year round. Sign up for SuperDraft today using the promo code Awesemo10, and it's $10 free on your first deposit of $10 or more, and $20 total free on your first deposit of $100 or more. Download in the App Store or play at superdraft.io. SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. Of course, sports are back, and we're giving you your first month of Awesemo Plus half off when you use the promo code RESTART at checkout. That's only $45 for a month of Awesemo's leading DFS projections, tools, and content for NBA, MLB, PGA, and more. Celebrate the return of sports with this great deal. You won't find a better value anywhere else. This offer is valid through August the 3rd. I guess the other thing we should mention here, and we'll talk about it obviously when we get to the Angels, Mike Trout is out due to paternity leave, so that is something to definitely pay attention to. We've got a 12-game main slate, but we do have 13 games. You do have one early game, that's the Cardinals and the Brewers.
Yeah, Jack Flaherty taking on Brett Anderson. Flaherty, obviously one of the better pitchers in baseball. Ridiculous strikeout numbers against right-handed hitters in general, or specifically, good strikeout pitcher in general. But the projected lineup for Milwaukee, pretty balanced, but looks like you're expecting 5 righties in there. Obviously, Flaherty is going to be a much higher upside option than Brett Anderson on the other side.
And, of course, the main slate starts at 7:05. Red Sox and Yankees are going to kick it off. Weber going for the Red Sox and Montgomery for the Yankees.
Yeah, Ryan Weber beat up a little bit by the Orioles in his last start. He's 5,400, obviously a brutal matchup against the Yankees. Right now, a 6.7 implied run total for New York. So don't think I'll be looking to Weber. Certainly can look to the Yankees bats there. Jordan Montgomery in his first start for the Yankees. This will be his first start for the Yankees. So not sure right now how stretched out he is. He's got good stuff, but it is still a tough matchup against the Red Sox. He's a pitcher that in previous years I've really believed in. He has multiple pitches that can get swinging strikes, but it is going to be a tough spot going up against righties in Peraza, Martinez, Bogarts, Pilar, all low strikeout guys that have some power. Christian Vasquez as well, coming off of a 2-home run game last night. So I think pitching wise, it's going to be pretty tough to trust anything in this game. But if I had to go to one, it would be Montgomery, assuming that he's not on too restrictive of a pitch count.
When it comes to the Yankees bats, I mean, obviously everyone's going to look at the big names. Is there one that sticks out to you above all else?
Well, Torres, so keep an eye on the lineup for one, obviously, but Gleyber Torres left last night's game with an injury. But Aaron Judge looks really cheap at only 4,600 on DraftKings. Obviously, he has as much power as anyone in the lineup. Ryan Weber, not really a known commodity. Last year, limited time in the majors, not a strikeout pitcher. Gave up a lot more power to lefties than righties. But with the amount of power that the righties in this Yankees lineup have, I'm not too concerned about that. So from a platoon advantage, obviously you're looking at Hicks. But I think from a salary standpoint, Judge is the one that really stands out.
Then at 7:10, we got a pair of games at 7:10. We got the Mets and the Braves. Porcello going for the Mets. He's 7,000. Newcomb for the Braves at 6,800.
Yeah, pretty tough spot again for both pitchers. Porcello is someone that doesn't really strike out a ton of guys, and you've got an Atlanta lineup that is difficult to strike out as well. Sean Newcomb on the other side, I think, is the higher upside fantasy pitcher just based on talent. He's young. He'll walk a lot of guys, but he also has some strikeouts. He did throw 82 pitches in his first start, which actually also came against the Mets. Only went 3 1/3 innings, but the 82 pitches was good to see because we've seen Atlanta kind of baby their starters early on with Mike Soroka and Max Fried. So it's good to see the 82 pitches. It is a fair price tag, I think, at 6,800. Not sure on a 12-game slate how much you'll need to get there. I think that you're going to be able to find some other pitching that looks a little bit better, but Newcomb, from a talent standpoint, I think is a little bit better than a $6,800 pitcher.
Just popped it up. In the Mets, third in the majors in batting average so far.
Yeah, I know. The other night they kind of had a disappointing game. They almost came back against the Red Sox, but just got a million guys on base, couldn't get them in. But a pretty formidable lineup for sure.
Then we got the Reds up against the Tigers. Bauer, 10,500. So he's one of the top pitchers on the night, and Turnbull going for the Tigers. Is Bauer a guy that is, as you look at those top tier pitching options, is he a guy you're looking at more than others?
He will be if he starts. This is something to keep an eye on because the Reds and Cubs got rained out yesterday. So there's a chance that you're going to see Luis Castillo get this start. If it's Bauer, then I think it's obviously one of the better spots you're going to get going up against the Tigers. Bauer is a really good strikeout pitcher, really good pitcher overall. I'd love to get to him, especially when you look at the other top tier pitchers. You have Yu Darvish, who is the same price as Bauer. I don't think is good of a pitcher. Blake Snell, a little bit more expensive. I think he said that he probably won't be ready to go, fully ready for another few weeks. And then you have Clevenger, a little bit less expensive, facing the Twins in a brutal matchup. So Bauer would really stand out of that group. If the Reds go with Castillo, he's only $8,000 on DraftKings. So you would have very clearly probably the most popular pitcher on the slate, but also a play that I really don't know how you would get away from.
And Tigers have the second most strikeouts this year, but also lead the league in homers.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I mean, that's just in terms of the Reds bats. Is there one bat that sticks out to you?
I think normally against Turnbull, you're going to be looking for left-handed power. In general, he's actually a pretty decent pitcher, but last season, a 26% strikeout percentage to righties, only 19% to lefties, a 178 expected ISO to lefties. So you're definitely prioritizing left-handed bats here. That basically gives you Joey Votto at first base. It gives you Mike Moustakas, who's very favorably priced at 3,600, second base, third base eligibility on DraftKings. Those two look the best. You also would have a cheap leadoff guy in Shogo Akiyama, most likely, and then Jesse Winker, most likely batting sixth. Moustakas is the number one guy for me, though.
You mentioned about Blake Snell going for the Rays, 10,800. They're going up against the Orioles. Cobb on the other side of the mound.
Yeah, Cobb actually looked pretty decent in his first start for Baltimore. He's only 4K, which, it's a $4,000 pitcher. I think that a lot will come down to, kind of how the slate shakes out as far as value goes, because we've seen pricing be really cheap on some teams, namely Kansas City, for the first few slates. With 12 games, you're probably going to be able to find enough bats that you don't have to go to a 4K Alex Cobb against a Tampa team that has an almost 6 implied run total. But he's better than a $4,000 pitcher. I mean, he threw 78 pitches his last time out against Boston, struck out 6. He's someone that at the very least I'll be interested to see how his start goes, because at one point he was actually a pretty good pitcher. He dealt with a bunch of injuries since then. I'll be interested to see if he can carry over what he had that first time out, but I don't think he'll be someone I need to prioritize because I think there'll be value elsewhere.
Is there any Orioles bats that interest you at all?
I don't think so. I mean, Snell, you're not really expecting him to go too deep into the game, but he's still a really good pitcher. There's still 23 other teams to choose from, and just not a whole lot to like from Baltimore, I don't think. You have some favorable pricing on guys, but I just don't think that with 12 games, it's going to be a team that I need to get to.
I guess for the newer MLB DFS player, in terms of roster construction for a 12-game slate, is there a piece of advice you would give them?
I mean, obviously stacking is always important. It's something that people are doing more and more of now, but still probably not doing quite enough of. On 12-game slates, I think it becomes even more important because the more games there are on a slate, the likelihood of one or two teams just going crazy and scoring a ton of runs is higher, obviously. So I think that it becomes even more important to be stacking or double stacking on 12-game slates than on some shorter slates.
Are the Rays one of those teams you're looking at in terms of stacking?
Yeah, because, while I said, maybe Alex Cobb is coming back to form and going to start pitching well, there's still a lot of uncertainty there. It's a park upgrade for Tampa Bay, getting out of Tropicana, going into Camden Yards. And this team just has a ton of power at affordable price tags. Hunter Renfroe's got a ton of power. Tsutsugo coming over from Japan, his salary is starting to rise, but every projection system has him right around a 220 ISO this year, which is really good. So I think it's a high upside stack. You can always go to the bottom of the order too, with Mike Zunino as a high upside catcher option that usually doesn't have much ownership. So it's the kind of spot where if they're getting a lot of ownership, which they might because of their implied run total, maybe I'll shy away a little bit in tournaments because there is a chance that Cobb isn't a total gas can. But if people are going to other stacks, there's still enough uncertainty around Cobb and around a bad Baltimore bullpen that it's a really high upside spot.
You mentioned about the Royals are taking on the Red Sox. You got another 4,000 pitcher on the Royals side and Dallas Keuchel for the White Sox.
Yeah, Dallas Keuchel going for the White Sox. He's been around forever now and doesn't really strike guys out. Generally does a good job keeping the ball on the ground. Will have some issues with right-handed power, which the Royals actually have with Merrifield, Soler, Perez, and Maikel Franco. But DraftKings finally moved the pricing a little bit. Kind of funny it took to get to a mediocre pitcher in Keuchel to get them to increase the salaries. But no more $2,600 Salvador Perez, no more $3,500 Soler. Got to pay for Kansas City a little bit. And against someone in Keuchel, I don't think it's really going to be necessary to go to mediocre bats here against a pitcher that generally does a pretty good job of limiting power. On the other side, the $4,000 pitcher going for Kansas City, Chris Bubic, who last season he hasn't pitched above high A. He made 17 starts there last year, 101 and 2/3 innings. Good strikeout numbers, struck out 28%, walked 7%. Obviously, you're talking about single A, so only so much you can take away from that. The White Sox implied run total right now is 5.5, so Vegas leaning towards their bats as I would as well. It's a dangerous White Sox lineup. It's also a really affordable lineup going against the lefty with a cheap Tim Anderson, Yohan Moncada from the weaker side of the plate, but still a really good hitter. Cheap Jose Abreu. Grandal is one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. You just have right-handed power really 1 through 7 in this lineup. So I think it's going to be a stack that I get to a lot.
Yeah, using Fantasy Cruncher, it seems like Sal Perez has been coming up a lot for me over the past couple of days with a lot of other Royals. Of course, if you go over to Awesemo.com, we do have free premium content available right now, the MLB player ranking, so you definitely want to check that out over at Awesemo.com. Then we got the Indians against the Twins. Clevenger, 10,000, obviously going to be someone that when people go in to set their lineups, I got to imagine he's going to be someone that a lot of people could potentially target.
Yeah, one of the highest strikeout upside pitchers on the slate. He comes in, actually, aside from Blake Snell, he had the highest strikeout percentage on the slate last year at 33.5%. It's a brutal matchup against the Twins. Obviously, pitchers as talented as Clevenger can still have success. You're seeing Shane Bieber last night had a really good start despite the tough matchup. But I think what's going to make it tough for me to get to Clevenger is that this looks like a slate that does have a little bit more pitching than, say, the slate yesterday did. You're going to have either Bauer or Castillo for Cincinnati, which I think either one is going to be a preferred option over Clevenger, who's priced up. You're also going to have some other mid-range arms that have upside. So outside of maybe if he's getting very little ownership in tournaments, taking a flyer on his strikeout ability, I don't think he's going to be a priority just because the matchup against Minnesota is so tough.
Ramirez and Garver are the top options hitting wise in this game. Are either one of those players someone that you're targeting?
Yeah, Ramirez especially has obviously the more favorable matchup against Randy Dobnak going for the Twins. The salary is affordable. The Indians in general are actually really cheap here for a team that has as much power as they do. It's not the same Cleveland lineup that we'd seen in previous years that really top to bottom just has had great hitters, but you do still have guys that have power even if they're flawed. Franmil Reyes, Bradley Zimmer has some pop. Domingo Santana has some power, even though they're not the best hitters. And then at the top with Ramirez and Lindor, you do still have really good hitters there. So I think as a stack, the Indians make a lot of sense just because they're affordable and have a high ceiling. And then individually going to guys like Ramirez and Lindor in particular is going to be a good idea.
Also at 8:10 Eastern time, we got the Padres and the Rockies. Gray going for the Rockies, Richard going for the Padres. And as I just look at the salaries for the hitters in this game, we got a lot of high-price hitters in this one.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising because both of these pitchers are talented pitchers. They both threw between 70 and 80 pitches their first time out, and neither one's expensive. So the game being in Coors obviously is the issue. Both guys are fastball slider pitchers, which plays a little bit better in Coors. The pricing is, like you said, it's expensive. It's not for some guys, it's not quite as high as you normally would expect in Coors. But then at the same time, you have a $6,000 Fernando Tatis, you have a $5,800 Charlie Blackmon. I'm really interested to see where ownership comes in on the pitching here in tournaments. Obviously, you're not going to Coors pitching in cash games, but while both of these lineups do have some good hitters, both of these lineups also have plenty of strikeouts for pitchers that are capable of getting it and who are really cheap. So I'm really interested to see how ownership ends up there. I really have no issue going to the Bats and Coors, but I just have respect for these pitchers, and so I'll be interested to see if they're going to be low owned.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting with just like someone like Tatis at 6,000. How much is he? What is his ownership in a GPP?
Right, it's going to be tough to get there because when you look at the cheap pitching options, are people really going to go to Alex Cobb at 4K? There's nothing really at the bottom. Like you have Taijuan Walker, who's cheap but has plenty of issues. There's nothing really cheap there that's going to make it easy to get to those bats. So my guess right now would be that the Coors game goes a little bit lower owned than Coors games normally do, especially because there's also 12 games on the slate. I think it'll be important to keep in mind too. A lot of times at the beginning of the season, Coors Field kind of disappoints because it's March or April and it's cold. The season's starting in July now, so you're not going to have those issues. It should play a lot more favorably than you normally get early in the season. So I think that with the pricing, I think there's a pretty good chance that full stacks are a little bit under-owned in this game.
Then we got the Pirates and the Cubs. Williams going for the Pirates, and I know when I looked, Darvish scheduled to get the slate for the Cubs.
Yeah, Yu Darvish in a good matchup against the Pirates, one of the weaker offenses in baseball. Looks like right now, if anything, the wind is expected to be blowing in, which is obviously a big deal in Wrigley. Looks like it's supposed to be in the mid-70s. No Vegas line out yet, but Darvish, a good strikeout pitcher, also gives up a lot of power. The main issue I'll have is just his price tag. It's going to be tough for me to go to him over Trevor Bauer or Luis Castillo, and then there's some other mid-range arms that are pretty good. So I think it'll be tough to get there where he's priced up. On the other side, you have Trevor Williams, who is a pretty mediocre pitcher, not great strikeout stuff, not a good matchup against Chicago, does struggle with left-handed power. So I think my priority in this game will be looking to bats. You can look for a cheap home run against Darvish with whether it's like a Colin Moran or Brian Reynolds. Josh Bell, a little more expensive, but in a really good spot. But then on the other side, Trevor Williams last year allowed a 226 ISO to lefties. You have Anthony Rizzo in there. You have Kyle Schwarber in there, both affordably priced. So I think grabbing some one-offs here will give you a pretty good chance at grabbing a home run.
Are the Cubs a team that people should be looking at as a stackable team?
Yeah, especially because the salaries are so affordable. Bryant and Rizzo at the top are 47 and 4,600, but outside of that, they're the most expensive on the team. Javi Baez is way too cheap for someone with the power and stolen base upside he brings. Contreras covers a weak catcher position, which is always appealing in a stack. And then from the 6 through 9 hitters are all dirt cheap. So it's a team that you should be able to stack and get to good pitching.
Then we got the Astros and the Angels. Lance McCullers going for the Astros, and Andres going for the Angels. We mentioned about no Trout in the lineup, obviously on paternity leave. I feel like we should put a line, will the Angels throw at one of the Astros hitters? I'm guessing after that suspension, they might be a little afraid to.
Yeah, I'm guessing the suspension kind of halts that, at least for a little bit. I think McCullers is going to look like one of the better pitching options on the slate. He threw 92 pitches his first time out, which was really good to see after, coming back from injury. But the Angels lineup, it still has some good hitters, but when you're missing Mike Trout, it obviously makes a really big difference. It still has some guys that are tough to strike out. Rendon's a tough strikeout. David Fletcher's a tough strikeout. So is Pujols, even though he's washed as a hitter. But then there's some high strikeout guys too. You can strike out Ohtani. Upton will strike out. Jason Castro is a high K guy. So it's kind of it's a decent lineup for strikeouts. McCullers also is really good at striking out lefties, which should come into play with Ohtani, La Stella, Castro, and Goodwin. But just a really cheap price tag, relative to some other pitchers on the slate for a guy that has the strikeout stuff McCullers does and the ground ball stuff McCullers does. I think that he's up there with whoever's pitching for the Reds as an early favorite target for me.
Is there a low price hitter that you think that people should be looking at?
Not really. I mean, McCullers not really someone that I want to target against. There are some cheap bats on the Angels, but I think there's going to be cheap bats on teams in better spots. From the Astro side against Andresi, Michael Brantley, 2,800, should be one of the highest owned players on the slate, most likely. I don't know why his pricing is so low, but at the very least, it's a cash game play, maybe a little bit high owned for tournaments, but a really good value. Also, keep an eye on Kyle Tucker. If he's at the bottom of the lineup, obviously his value goes down a bit, but we saw him lead off the other day. He's really cheap. And Josh Reddick actually also is like the minimum. So the Astros are another team that, while they're really good hitters, are expensive, Springer and Altuve, they're going to be pretty easy to stack with good pitching. So I think they're a really high upside team, but you'll probably also see some ownership going there because of that.
You got the Rangers and the Giants. Mine are 9,200. Webb slated to go for the Giants, 6,100. Texas offense, it's bad.
Yeah, they look absolutely terrible. San Francisco's playing, or appears to be playing, a bit more hitter friendly as they move the fences in this year. We've seen some home runs there early on. Logan Webb, not a great pitcher, but it's just still so tough to trust Texas. I mean, Joey Gallo is cheap enough where with his power, you're obviously excited to get to him in tournaments. Shin-Soo Choo is going to be a good option as well at 3,900. But from a full stack perspective, it's just so hard to get to this team because they're overall a collective, they're a team that has a lot of power, but there's not very good hitters outside of basically Gallo and Choo. So I like those two individually. I also like Mike Minor here because he is reasonably priced at 9,200. He's a decent strikeout pitcher, struck out 23.3% of hitters last year, but it's a pretty decent spot against the Giants. This is still a park that I expect to play favorably for pitchers. I mean, it was by far the best pitcher's park. Even moving the fences in a little bit isn't going to make that big of a difference, especially when you talk about this time of the year where so many stadiums are hot and humid. You're still playing in the Bay Area. It's still going to be in the 60s, so the ball's not going to carry quite as much. So I think Minor's another guy that'll be going on that list with McCullers and whoever's pitching for the Reds.
Like, you got to feel Gallo's price at some point is going to start going up.
Yeah, he's just the perfect example of, sometimes you'll hear people talk about, oh, this hitter's in a slump or he's not hitting the ball hard or whatever. Baseball is just such a small sample size from day to day that I really don't think it's important to get bogged down in that. It's much more important to pay attention to the salaries. And you just know that Joey Gallo, by the end of the season, most likely with it being 60 games, if it were 160 games for sure, would be more expensive than 4,300. He's just way more talented than that price tag. He has as much raw power as anybody in the league. So when you're getting him at a discount, I would much rather just be rostering him every day at that price point than trying to guess when he's going to hit better.
You mentioned about Walker a little earlier going for the Mariners up against the A's, and as I look at the hitters in this game, it's all Oakland right at the top when it comes to the salaries.
Yeah, Taijuan Walker made his first start in a couple of years. Tough landing spot his first time out against Houston. He threw 67 pitches, gave up 5 earned runs. Gets interesting spot against Oakland. They're a team that can really punish mistakes. They have a lot of power throughout this lineup. They also have a lot of strikeouts in there. So if Walker is on, then he should be able to take advantage. The problem is just, this is a guy who has dealt with a ton of injuries, hasn't pitched in a couple of years, was not on in his first start of the year. So if I have to guess, which side prevails, I would look to the Oakland Bats.
In terms of the Mariners bats, I mean, is there something that you're kind of looking at as potential target?
I think that you can look to Evan White at only 2,900, but also Kyle Lewis, 3,800. He put up really good power numbers in the minors, and then he came up at the end of last year, continued to do so, and he's off to a good start this year. So righty-lefty matchup for Kyle Lewis going against Sean Manaea. I think Manaea's got good stuff. He's not someone I normally like to target. And it's not like it would be a cash game play or a super high owned play because the outfield position is going to be stacked. But I do think that Lewis has enough power to justify a $3,800 price tag here.
And then you got the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks in the final game of the night.
Yeah, really surprising to see a 5.2 implied run total for the Dodgers, I think. Zach Gallen's a really good pitcher. You have this game's in Chase Field. The roof is expected to be closed. Gallen last year struck out 29% of hitters. He did walk 11.5% as well. And the Dodgers are obviously a really good team. But this is a pitcher that not only did he have the high strikeout percentage, he didn't have drastic splits against either side of the plate either. He struck out 28.7% of lefties, 28.9% of righties, held lefties to a 150 expected ISO, 143 to righties. He's $8,700. It's definitely a scary spot, and it's not someone that I would trust in cash games, but I do think he's a really high upside pitcher, and I think the salary is accounting for this tough matchup against the Dodgers.
In terms of the bats in this game, is there something we should be paying attention to?
I don't think I'm going to be too interested in the bats here. As I said, Zach Gallen is a really good pitcher. You always can make the argument for the Dodgers just because this lineup has so much power in it that especially on days where they're not one of the more popular stacks, they're always going to be a good tournament stack just because it's really easy for them to break a slate open. But Gallen's just, I think, a really good pitcher. This park with the roof closed is not favorable for hitters. And then on the other side for the Diamondbacks, you have some decent hitters there. Tony Gonzalez making the start for the Dodgers last year did a good job of limiting power over a relatively small sample size, pretty average strikeout stuff. I just don't think it's going to be a game I'm targeting all that much for bats.
And just kind of an overall thought just on the entire slate on Friday. I mean, is there something throughout the day you're, obviously besides the typical stuff that you're going to be monitoring?
Yeah, obviously where we can find value in lineups will be important. The big news we'll be looking for is who's pitching for the Reds, whether they push Castillo back or Trevor Bauer, because that'll make a big difference because whichever of them starts, I think is one of the best pitching options on the slate. Overall, it looks like a slate where I expect my pitching ownership will probably be pretty concentrated. I think that there's a few pitchers that really stand out above the rest, and then there's going to be a lot of stacks where you can just kind of play the ownership game, and the field will probably pick their one or two favorites and go really heavy on them. And there's not going to be a shortage of other ones that you can get to that have the same upside.
Of course, be sure to hit that like button here on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast apps, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you always get notified when new shows do come out. Of course, we're sponsored by SuperDraft. Use the promo code Awesemo10 and you get $10 free on your first deposit of $10 or more and $20 total free on your first deposit of $100 or more. Download in the App Store or play at superdraft.io. SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. Of course, also be sure to check out the restart promo that we have going on where you get Awesemo Plus half off when you use the promo code RESTART at checkout. That's $45 for a month of Awesemo's leading DFS projections, tools, and content for NBA, MLB, PGA, and more. So you definitely want to check that out. Of course, coming up on Friday, we've got the NBA Strategy Show, live before lock on NBA and MLB. Adam, anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here?
No, I think that's about it.
And of course, as always, be sure to subscribe to Awesemo on your Apple Podcasts and all the podcasting platforms, and be sure to hit that thumbs up button here on YouTube. And that is the Early Bird Podcast for Friday's slate of MLB action.